Good people of a great nation, I welcome you to the second and conclusive segment of Development Focus with Jide Ojo on ITV. This time around, we are going to be discussing the Nigeria oil and gas sector, or better state, the Nigeria petroleum sector. A lot has been happening in that sector for some time. Towards the end of about October last year, we were so jubilant when we have the Petroleum Industry Act signed into law after about 18 years of advocacy. And, I brought an expert that will explain that whether we should be jubilant, whether we have actually arrived, whether it's uhuru for the Nigeria oil and gas sector. We are also looking in this interview, we'll be looking at the oil theft and the impact on Nigeria's economy, as well as looking at our oil dependency. Is there no way out? I mean, others are thinking of, we are told in the next 20, 30 years, nobody will procure your fossil fuel. Everybody is going for green, alternate, solutions to. In fact, now we have electric cars being mass-produced. Some countries have given like 5 years that in 5 years they will phase out all the, diesel engine and petroleum engine vehicles. So, Tengi is here. Tengi Ikoli will be talking to us about what are actually our afflictions in the oil and gas sector, our petroleum sector. What are the issues and how do we overcome? So, Tengi, you are welcome on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do. I'm not able to do sufficient justice to that. I know you are a learned friend, as they say, of a lawyer, but you work for. Let's get to know exactly more about your person.
Yes, thank you. My name is Tengi Ojo Tmi Seg. And I'm a lawyer and I'm an economist as well. I've been working.
How did you manage to do both simultaneously, law and economy?
I'm just a joint honors. I've always had a passion for both, and I guess I couldn't let go of either. And so here we are. It was sort of a good starting point for me, and I think it's led me to the work that I've done so far, which is for the last 6 years. I've been working in the oil and gas sector around governance issues specifically. I've worked with an organization called the Nigeria Natural Resource Charter, which implemented a charter that guided resource-rich countries, oil and gas companies, private sector, international organizations on what were the best ways that resource-rich countries could maximize and optimize the benefits from their natural resources for the benefit of their citizens. And thereafter, which is where I work now, I work with an organization called the Natural Resource Governance Institute. And that organization actually developed the charter, which I was implementing in my last job. And so now we're focusing on imagining a future beyond oil, everything that you mentioned. What does that mean for Nigeria in terms of its oil dependency? How can it start to chart a path that ensures that it's not left behind when we start to move towards green economy? How can it tap in to those opportunities? Because there's a lot of revenue there, which countries like South Africa and Gabon are taking advantage of. So how can we position Nigeria in a way that it can still get value from its oil and gas sector right now, diversify into other sectors, and take advantage of the opportunities that are emerging now in terms of the green economy?
Okay, so much in one intervention. Let's look. Nigeria. You are from Niger Delta.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
So you are a daughter of the soil.
Fully, yes. Bielsa and Delta.
Oh, interesting. So you are full-blooded Niger Delta. What is the experience? We started oil exploration 1956, 58. Mm-hmm. Then in commercial quantity, like 1960, thereabout. what are the issues in Nigeria's petroleum sector? I know it's a long value chain, but what, to your own mind, as a Niger Deltan, as somebody also working in that sector, what are the issues, if you are to calibrate the key issues in Nigeria's petroleum sector?
One of the key issues I would say is in terms of value addition is one of the challenges that we've had. So in terms of our exports, we've exported crude for quite a while. Refineries have been a challenge for us in Nigeria, where we only have about 18% of our current refinery capacity being utilized. So we have the Dangote refinery coming on stream, all those sort of different aspirations, but you have that being a first challenge in terms of what kind of value can we get from our crude. How can we fully exploit that value chain is one thing. And then how can we get the benefits to those, for instance, the communities where these resources are exploited from. So places like where I'm from, for instance, how do we get the value from to those regions? And then we have that, a dovetail from that is by not ensuring that those regions are fully developed, using those resources, then you then have restiveness. You then have, to some extent, pipeline vandalisms and other sort of malaise. But then as we see from recent reports around crude oil theft in those regions, it is more sophisticated. So even those smaller pipeline vandalisms cannot result in the sort of losses that have been reported, you know. And then you have sort of more of corruption and those challenges that happen in those regions. That's one. Then taking us now to when the product is extracted and when it's taken to the pump, where we can then fill our transportation, our cars, etc. You have the proper resources and proper revenues not dovetailing down to Nigerians. What do I mean by that? You have our pump recently, we have where we didn't have a lot of petrol issues that we had. We had dirty fuels being brought into the country. We had scarcity issues as well. And a lot of people ask, why was that the case when we had an opportunity a couple of, maybe last year, to remove fuel subsidy, for instance, when poor prices were at a comparative level. So what you'll see then is that, unfortunately for us, we didn't remove fuel subsidy. So what that means is that the funds that are supposed to go to Nigerians are instead being repatriated elsewhere. So right now you had the government having to reduce its estimates of what it thought that it would produce from 1.6 million barrels per day to 1.8 to 1.6, where we're not producing enough, for instance, and we're having to increase our prices for oil as well, estimates, because of what's going on in the world right now. So the question is, why are all these things happening? Why are we responding to these different changes without properly taking the funds that we need, for instance, and putting it into areas that would increase development in Nigeria? The challenges there you see is that, unfortunately, we're not planning for the future. And that's what my project is looking at. How do we plan for the future? How do we make sure that the revenues that we're getting from oil go directly back to those who need it, to the citizens? How does it go directly to the communities like in Bayelsa and Delta states where people actually need development? How do you make sure that it gets to those people directly? So those are some of the challenges that we find in the value chain.
Okay. I allowed you to fully express yourself because there's a lot for us to chew. You have been involved in advocacy around Petroleum Industry Act, isn't it? Now we have it. What are the takeaways from that?
So one of the key successes at the time was the deregulation of the downstream sector. And what that meant was we would have a free, open downstream sector where market prices will determine the price at the pump. Nigerians will know what the prices would be, and resources that we get from oil will be used for the economy. So potentially to diversify beyond oil, to make sure that our manufacturing sector works, education sector works, agricultural sector, maybe even tap into this green economy. We have a decade of gas that we're looking into, which I'm sure we'll discuss a bit later. Potential funds that can go into infrastructure for that as well, so Nigerians can get revenue from that sort of arena. But the challenge there is we have that things rolling back. in that regard now, where the government has been shared subsidy, and then it's stated that it's going to remove those sections or stay those sections in the law that had us having one of the victories from the PIA, for instance. So that's one of the challenges that we had. Another thing that the PIA was meant to do was to make Nigeria more competitive. So we see now that investments for oil and gas projects, fossil fuel projects, are reducing, will reduce over time. Like you said, in the next 20, 30 years, an estimate that we'll no longer get the sort of returns that we're getting now. We have countries like India, China, Europe, where Nigeria tends to export most of its oil, having commitments to reduce their fossil fuel exploitation over the next 20 to 30 years. So what would that mean for Nigeria in terms of getting less revenue? So even though we may have included terms in the PIA that make us more competitive, it may have been too little too late. But again, we still have a 20-year mark to exploit this. But then, which is why when you see the government rolling back subsidy or putting back subsidy, is a bit of a challenge, because those funds could be used potentially to improve our infrastructure in gas, for instance, and other aspects of the economy.
I agree with you. But let's also look at the issue of host community compensation, or the controversial 3% vis-a-vis 5% or 10% that was initially demanded. And I've had somebody on this show telling us that, look, even this 3% is not something to celebrate, beyond the fact that there is also a clause that says if you are involved, if a community is involved in oil pipeline vandalism, it doesn't get that 3%. And now there was an instance, I don't know if you know about it, in Bayelsa State, your own state, where a community, there was an oil spill, and the people of the community said the oil spill is as a result of negligence of the oil company operating in their community. But the oil company is saying it's the youth of the community that went and disrupted its operations or vandalized its pipeline. That was why that oil spill took place. Nesdra, Minister of Environment, Minister of State for Environment, they were all there, and each was talking at cross purposes. Some agrees with the state government that it's the oil company that is at fault. Some are saying it's the youth that... Now, these are part of practical challenges of implementing this PIA as to what should have come to the community as a means of improving their living standard. It's also being denied them under the guise that they were involved, or the use of the community were involved in pipeline vandalism. What's your reaction to that? I don't know if you are aware of that issue I raised.
I'm aware of the spill.
Okay, in one community, I don't know.
Yes, not necessarily how this has materialized. And we did realize that in terms of implementation, this was one of the challenges that could happen in terms of that. And that was one of the areas that we actually spoke against, that it would be difficult to ascertain who was responsible for what, and it would be a bit too complicated. But unfortunately, that sort of stayed in the law. And as you're explaining, this is something that has materialized in terms of the challenges of implementation. And it's unfair, actually, to those in the communities, because it's difficult to sort of tell and police. So that way, it could checkmate a lot of the things that they could potentially get, which was already, again, a challenge, because they had advocated for 5% instead of 3%. And the more you get to reduce that sum that's coming to them, the less they're able to take care of things like environmental remediation, or including opportunities for them in those communities. Again, we've said that there's a sunset in terms of 20 to 30 years, likely, when oil will no longer be the main, actually the same sort of sum that it would have then. Naturally, the entitlements to these communities then will definitely reduce, or might be eroded. So they have a small amount of time to even take opportunity and advantage of that as well, to revert the different economical and social challenges that they have suffered as a result of as a result of this exploitation that's been going on in areas where they live in. So it's something that I would definitely call on legislators to rethink and potentially even amend, because again, we're already seeing in terms of implementation the challenges that are faced, especially because it's difficult to police the pipelines and the extent of oil exploitation.
So what's your take? Nigerian government try to develop the Niger Delta region. So in 2001, it set up NDDC. How will you rate the performance of NDDC in terms of development of the Niger Delta communities?
I mean, we'll see that development in Niger Delta is not where we'd expect it to be. You can compare it to countries like Qatar, countries like Dubai, areas where they have had fossil fuel exploitation and they have completely transformed their areas. Nigeria, especially Niger Delta, looks nothing like that comparatively in terms of industry, in terms of social experience of those in those regions. In terms of environment, we have a lot of different suits and different oil spillages that affect the livelihoods, even sort of degenerates the livelihoods they already had pre-existing. So, I mean, there's even beyond NDDC, there's 13% derivation as well, which is not talked about, I think, enough. Mm-hmm. In terms of states being able to also take that revenue and transform the region. You had the Niger Delta Master Plan as well, which came into being. All these different initiatives, and not enough has been done, and the time is running out. So if any sort of transformation or change is supposed to be done, it's going to be within this period of time. Can we catch up? It doesn't seem feasible, given that we're also not able to increase our production. Our production levels are also reducing. Revenues that are coming in right now are only because of this spike that we have in oil prices. What happens when, again, this Russian-Ukraine conflict douses down or there's a resolution? You know, we cannot sort of be at the mercy of these sorts of global effects. We have to start to build our economy and find alternatives now, because we do have a very short period of time.
It's like your fixation is about alternative to fuel. Mm-hmm. But let's look at, yes, 20 years transitional period, so to speak. Sure. But I'm looking at different, you mentioned some of them. NDDC, there was a forensic audit done last year. And what came out was very, very startling revelations about corruption and sharp practices within that, 20-year-old commission. Then you have the issue around the Ministry of Niger Delta was also to head and the development of Niger Delta. The amnesty program since 2009 was meant to calm restiveness, direct response to dousing tension as a result of militancy in the Niger Delta. But in spite of all of this, you go to Niger Delta communities and you still see, very deplorable conditions of living of the people. What role has corruption played in all of this?
I mean, obviously, the role of corruption has been very high, obviously. A lot of the funds that should go to the communities have not gone to the communities, which is what the PIA was meant to do, meant to find a way to get the funds away from these different structures and bring it directly to the people. So create a structure where you have companies talking to community members. Again, there was a conversation around that period was, should we close down, let's NDDC close down and let the funds be given to a structure that ensures that the funds are given to the community, that they direct sort of communication in terms of what are your needs as a community, how do we develop that? Again, I mean, if it hasn't been successful, I would say the potential to scrap it and find other alternatives. If something isn't working, you want to find another way to make it work better. So I think that could be something that could be considered in terms of how do we scrap the ones that have not worked and find ways to make it more directly accessible, the funds and the resources to those in the communities.
Now, there is this issue of oil theft that you alluded to earlier. Nigerian House of Reps is investigating or set up a committee to inquire about why have we consistently have to grapple with issue of oil theft at an industrial scale. And you alluded to it earlier that it's very sophisticatedly done beyond this artisanal refiners. Who I didn't want to call them miners. I don't know whether that qualifies for mining, but artisanal refiners who engages in petty oil theft. Is that what is responsible for the quantum of resources? We have NIMASA, we have Nigerian Navy, and yet we have this level of oil theft in the Nigerian maritime domain. What's your take on that?
I mean, it's a huge concern. A number of years ago, we flagged this as well in my former organization about the significance of the oil theft that was going on and that it was likely more sophisticated than initially seen. I was more referring to the pipeline vandalism. Artisanal mining, we cannot necessarily tell what the information is and how that contributes. Certainly, initially, before you have this conversion to modular refineries and the government trying to find ways to bring that into the system, we cannot tell what that was before. Hopefully now things are less porous in that regard. But again, there were task forces that were dedicated to catching and policing the oil theft in that region. So it's still concerning that with those task forces having been created, those police forces working with the communities, that these perpetration of crude oil theft has continued, especially to this scale. This is the largest sort of oil theft that we have seen in a very long while. So, I mean, it will be to the police forces, what are they doing? Are they turning a blind eye? How are they not seeing what is going on right there? Or do we need to expand the section around there? Or is it corruption? How is that sort of filtering through? So there's certainly a lot of questions to be asked in terms of why that is still continuing, despite all the efforts that has been put towards checkmating.
Do you think government is doing enough, really? Because I don't know whether I saw a video clip of Governor Nyesom Wike coming out openly to say that some NCDC, that's civil defense officials, that are providing cover for some of those who are involved in artisanal refining. What's the name they call it over there? So they provide them cover, they aid and abet them to do that, and he actually asked for mass transfer of those personnel out of the state, sometimes last year. But this is just like a drop in the ocean, because those who are engaging in artisanal refining of crude cannot, by any stretch of imagination, be taken to be why we are losing over 300,000 barrels per day of crude oil to these vendors. And something shocking also happened. Last year, I think I engaged that issue in my column in The Punch, where they said the federal government is spending like 60 billion every year to repair vandalized pipeline. When shall there be an end to all this corruption in the value chain of Nigeria's petroleum sector?
Yeah, I think again, because we've alluded to the fact that it's more sophisticated, so there might be other more forensic, sort of more technical forensic measures that might be applied. I know that you can tend to tell the quality or where...
Sorry, we need to go on break. I'm told we'll be back shortly. We need to pay for some bills.
Fair enough.
Welcome back from that short break. We needed to pay some bills. Tengi, sorry to pause you, but let's now look at what does your organization, do you have any working relationship with NDDC?
Yes.
If you do, what kind of relationship exists between your organization and Nigeria Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative?
What sort of relationship do we have? Organization has worked with NDDC for a very long time, for a number of years. And in fact, we had an engagement recently on oil dependency. So trying to figure out how do we design and engage Nigeria on the larger focus of economic development, so channeling oil and gas into longer term, sustainable, environmentally and economically sustainable development for Nigeria. So that's sort of like what we're looking at in our partnership at the moment.
Okay, so let's get back to this issue of fuel subsidy. You seem to disagree with those who are of the opinion that there is need to pay arm and leg to keep the subsidy alive. That puts you at cross purposes with the Nigerian labor unions, who said, don't ever think of removing the subsidy. Now,
that sounds like a setup.
The National Assembly has just approved 4 trillion for subsidy in 2022 alone. What's your take on that?
So you have set me up in that statement.
I didn't set you up.
That I am at cross purposes with labor union.
I knew you were not. I'm not. Let me say, I didn't set you up. I'm also not in support of.
No, fair enough. What I will say is, I think there's a recognition in general that the fuel subsidy system we're running, it's not working for Nigerians.
It's opaque and
it's not working at all. The funds that we get, in fact, it was initially 3.5 trillion. And now it's about 4.4 trillion. Why is that the case? I know that National Assembly was also conducting an audit in terms of what the daily consumption and what actually contributes to that figure.
And I learned the minister said we don't even know how much we are consuming per day.
So that's another thing as well. So why are we even increasing? Why was it that large in the first place is another question. My challenge with this is the creation of the fuel subsidy is trying to ensure that Nigerians get some benefits from this. But how many Nigerians actually benefit from this? Are there no other ways that Nigerians can actually benefit in real terms? And what are we losing as a result? You have a lot of the funds that are supposed to go to NNPC from fuel subsidy and paid to FAC, which then gets to the Federation and then gets shared. We're losing out that money that could go to paying salaries, to pay for infrastructure and development in different states across the country. Is that the best way to spend the money? That's my challenge. There were other things that we could do and benefit from, especially given the fact that we don't have the right figures. So where's the money going? How are we calculating that sum? Is it actually for the benefit of Nigerians? We were on an interview together, I think a couple of weeks ago on NTA, and you mentioned that people had to buy jerry can worth of petrol, and you had to buy what now is 165 at the pump potentially. Had to pay as large as 500, 600.
Yeah, sure.
If you allow market forces...
That was just in March.
Just in March. If you allow market forces to prevail, that will not be the case. The market will balance it out and will pay what we need to and then get the funds channeled to where it should. Nigerians will say, no, fuel subsidy, at least I know that one is coming to me. But you don't know that necessarily. Let's first of all ensure that we cut off that line, and then we can then pursue where the money is actually going to on different arenas. It doesn't benefit Nigerians at all to have this. So the money that you didn't want to pay, you had to now eventually pay when it was black market, when petrol was no longer accessible and there was scarcity. So it's more of a psychological thing to me that we think that we are attached to the subsidy regime, but it's not beneficial in the long term. It's unsustainable. We don't have the funds. Now that we've had to pay these funds up front, we now have a larger deficit, which is about 4% of our GDP. So we have to find the shortfall somewhere else. Those funds that should ordinarily go into infrastructure development, for instance, dedicated of gas that we keep on talking about, that we have an infrastructure deficit, and we have an infra crop that has been created as well to bridge deficit generally in Nigeria. Shouldn't those funds be better served in those sorts of platforms, into initiatives, than essentially being lost?
But many Nigerians will not agree with you, and I'm also with you on this. And I've written about it, and I believe that our fuel subsidy regime is a scam. It's a scam, not necessarily that the entire money is stolen, but because it allows for a lot of opacity and a lot of leakages. Because who computes? Minister of Petroleum, Minister of State for Petroleum Resources was recently asked how much fuel is Nigeria consumed, and he said he does not know, and that fuel, because it's low, compared to the fuel price in Nigeria is lower than all its neighboring countries, has encouraged a lot of smuggling across the border. And we have 1,400 unmanned illegal entry routes to Nigeria. 1,400. This is from Nigeria Immigration Service. Only 86 of Nigeria border is manned. So if you have 1,400 unmanned, and you have fuel price regime that is like 1/3 or half of what your other neighboring countries are paying, why would they not smuggle it?
Exactly.
But this mathematics, this logic doesn't seem to sync with Nigerian labor unions as well as
because it's a very critical point you make. Initially, we had about a number of years ago 35 million liters per day, and then it jettisoned to about 70. How does that happen? Are we having the same amount of imports?
Nigerians cannot even fuel their cars again because of low in the purchasing power in the economy. So now let's go to decade of gas. What does that mean to layman like me? What's the government tending to achieve with the decade of gas that was declared last year, I guess? Yes.
So what the government is saying is that Nigeria has a lot of gas that has been unexploited. There's a lot of revenue that could come from that. The gas can also help to bridge our energy, our power deficit, which again we have a lot of challenges around. It can also help to industrialize our economy as well. So that would potentially increase revenues that we're getting, increase jobs as well. Because Nigeria was sort of said at 2020 the poverty capital of the world, with a lot more unemployed than anywhere else in the world. So there's a lot of unemployed people, and we have a growing population as well. We have about 200 now, forecasted to be 400 million by 2050. So there's a lot of engagement that needs to be done by those people. So the government is seeing that as an opportunity to do so. You have this, and you say I'm fixated on it, but this is a true reality of what's going on in the world in terms of this potential sunset. So the government is saying, okay, we have potential deficits in our infrastructure and things that can help us to fully maximize and optimize our gas resources. Let's focus on this in the next 10 years to make sure that we're able to maximize this, bridge the gaps in terms of infrastructure, figure out a way to exploit both our associated gas, essentially saying that from our oil facilities, how can we also exploit gas from those sort of regions, and how can we also have non-associated gas resources also maximized as well. So it's trying to formally plug all the different weaknesses in that infrastructure in ways that you amplify the value that we can get from our gas. Focus on that for 10 years, starting from when it announced it last year.
Okay, so much loaded there. Now, are we on the right track? Really speaking, your organization, from your blog, article I read on your blog, talking about how to win Nigeria off oil dependency. This decade of gas, is it one of those things you think we need to do as a pathway to winning Nigeria off oil dependency?
I mean, it's an interesting argument. So even though gas is also a fossil fuel, potentially, and it might have its own sunset as well.
What is actually fossil fuel? I hear this buzzword a lot. To an ordinary citizen like me, who is not an industrial expert like you, what's actually fossil fuel?
Well, to go more technically, I guess fossil fuel is all the dead waste of human waste. Over time, it becomes oil, crude, at the level, yes, under the ground, and then that's sort of what we then get out and we call fossil fuel. So it's fossils, dead sort of over time, animals, humans, etc. over time. And then that's how we get the crude under the ground. Yeah, I know. When I first came to oil and gas as well, I was equally as curious as you. So that's why I know the answer to that question.
Interesting. I will take note of that. So we want to move to green what?
So cleaner energy fuels.
Clean energy.
Less carbonized sort of fuels. Okay. So that's what we're talking about in terms of decarbonization. So what the world is trying to do, again, is coming to climate change, right? So there's an assumption that we are in a danger zone for climate change and will boil over, essentially, in layman's terms. and yeah, the world will be at a dire straits. So the question is, how do we throw that back? And that's about decarbonization. But the question is, for African countries specifically, is how do we chart a path that's away from carbon that benefits us? Again, we have all these needs around power, we have needs around industrialization, etc., etc. So how does Nigeria define its own pathway out of decarbonization? Because we have needs, you know, in terms of, we haven't developed as much as other countries. So that's parking that in one section. But in terms of gas, there is still a lot of deficit in terms of infrastructure that we need to get the gas out of the ground. And the question here is investments. How do we get investments to get this gas sector working properly? Again, this is why I keep on going to the subsidy funds. That could have been better tailored in that direction, because international organizations and financial institutions are defunding fossil fuels. And if they won't fund it, you have to fund it yourself. You know, so we have to be very critical in terms of the decisions that we're making. So how are we spending our money in a way that benefits us, as opposed to wasting it in terms of corruption, in terms of wasting it in making decisions that are not beneficial to Nigeria, for instance. You know, so that is sort of the critical question. And we have this decade of gas, but it's not defined. It's not clearly defined in terms of what it looks like. What are the milestones that we need to chart? And that's something that we've all been asking in the sector, in terms of, can we get a clarity in terms of what the milestones are? Can civil society be involved in terms of interrogating that process as well, to make sure that we're heading in the right direction? There's a bit of silence there. So I think if there's one thing I would say is, let's ask more questions, because we see how dire things are for us and how we have to be very, very quick. We cannot spend the same time that we did in terms of PIA, 18 years. We don't have that time, in fact. So we need to make quick decisions, critical decisions, strategic decisions that will benefit Nigeria as a whole.
Now, in the article you and your boss wrote, which I read, you are talking about how this tie up to 2023 elections. What's the nexus? Do you want us to make it a campaign issue towards 2023? Throw some light on that.
I mean, this is a critical juncture in terms of, we're lucky that we have 2023 coming on board. So we can ask the critical questions of our leaders. Are they thinking the right things? Are they asking the right questions? Are they trying to take us to the future where we can exploit green economy? Have they thought this through? And even at the state level, so looking at both our federal and our state dependencies, national dependencies. So in states, for instance, like my state, for instance, we depend on FAC, where
85% of Bayelsa and Delta revenue,
yes, exactly. Yes, so about 85% exactly from oil. So what question are we going to ask those states? How are you going to make sure that when oil starts to reduce, we're still going to be viable as states? We're still going to have revenues. What are your plans for that? Those sorts of questions. You're coming into, you want to lead Nigeria, for instance, at presidency level. How do you make sure that we're able to take advantage of these green economy opportunities, but also ensuring that we're still exploiting our oil and gas in a way that is environmentally sustainable for our people? Because when that fund goes as well, what happens to those people in the regions? You have oil companies as well that are divesting away from Nigeria. What does that mean for us? How are you planning alternatives for this? So we need to ask more critical questions. It has to go beyond, stomach infrastructure, as they say, because at the end of the day,
I like the fact that you brought up the issue of stomach infrastructure.
No, but again, it's something it's a reality that's going to be talked about, and people that were thinking about it as well as I'm talking about this. So I had to bring it up in that regard. We can ask questions about how are you making sure that my future is secured. And it's not too far in terms of maybe next generation. It's still going to happen in your generation as well. So you have to start asking these questions when they come in and try to tell you that they want to run for office.
Okay. So, Tengi, let's look at the issue around winning Nigeria off fuel subsidy. Federal government borrowed 1.5 billion to fix Port Harcourt refinery. If you were to be the petroleum resources minister, like Alison Madueke, would you have advised government to throw in more money into those comatose refineries, Warri, Port Harcourt, Kaduna? We are borrowing money to go fix them. But there's a 650,000 barrel per day coming on stream, maybe at the end of this year, 2022, from Dangote refinery alone. And we are told that there are 3 modular refineries that have come on stream. Should government have gone to borrow that kind of money to fix those, what they call ailing refineries? Was that a good decision?
In fact, we had actually mentioned that, but I've actually mentioned that before in a number of interviews and conversations as well, and pieces. In terms of, was that the best use of our money? I initially suggested taking on the LNG model, where you had private sector playing more of a role in terms of refurbishing or ensuring that those refineries work optimally. Because we've seen that times when government has gone into certain things, it hasn't worked out properly. It hasn't been able to be productive. So I thought government should have paid attention to other areas and allowed private sector more to participate. And that had been sort of the statement that had been made by the government up until the point where they decided to borrow those funds to refurbish the refineries. Again, and that was just for one refinery. And that money, again, like I said, could have gone so much further because you have decade of gas that you're essentially speaking about as well. Wouldn't that fund be better served in those sort of arenas? Wouldn't that be better served in the different other sectors of the economy as well? So that's sort of the question I wonder as well, what decision or what metrics or what modeling went into making that decision? It would be interesting to see that.
Because I was staunchly against it. I feel that is not a good use of our resources. More so that we are piling up debt. Now, you're an economist. Do the maths for me, if you can. We are having increase in the price of crude in the international market. But some economists have said it's not good for us because we are not self-sufficient in petroleum refining. Is that so?
It's not good for us?
Yeah, because the price, we should have been jubilant that the price of crude is going up, and then we are making more money. But it's like, I'm told, I'm a layman, I agree. I'm told that, look, we should not be excited about this because this also have implication on our import bill in terms of importation of refined petroleum products and all whatnot. So I'm trying to figure that out.
So ordinarily, we should have been, in fact, again, that speaks to the our production issues as well.
Exactly.
Our production, as the government has recently rolled that down, instead of, again, we have OPEC limitations, certainly.
Now, OPEC was 1.8.
Yes, exactly. So we're not able to meet. So we've now rolled back down below OPEC's commitment to 1.6, which is a challenge. And that speaks to our longer-term concern, because if we're rolling it back an opportunity like this, if not for the rising and spiking oil prices, what would we have done? We'll be receiving less and going further into deficits in terms of our projections with our budgets. So these are the challenges that we've had because we don't have a working refineries. Well, not to the capacity that they should be. Only 80% utilization.
Which one is even operating at 18%? I'm not sure any of them is producing
summarily as a whole. Yes.
Anyway, you know better than me. So now let's spend the last few minutes of this interview talking about weaning Nigeria off its oil dependency. How easy is that going to be? We've been a monoculture economy for over 60 years now. A monoculture economy depending solely or largely on oil and gas proceeds revenue to fund our budgets. Our budget is even denominated in terms of dollar and all of that. So run us through what exactly do we need to do if we are going to get off this feeding bottle federalism way of doing things?
There are a lot of different challenges that we have already, as you mentioned. It's historical in terms of our challenges. But we're hoping that we've seen the writing on the wall now, we start to make more definitive decisions. So clearly we have to diversify our revenue base beyond. Are
we not doing that enough?
No, we have.
Federal government said they have diversified into non-oil sector. They are growing agriculture. You recall the Anchor Borrowers program, trillions spent. They said over 21 products.
But not enough. not enough. Again, the scenario in looking at winning yourself of oil is saying, if oil goes, how do we bridge that shortfall? So one, we have over 99% of our export reliance on crude. So how do we bridge that shortfall? How do we look at, again, I mentioned the opportunities with the green economy, and also manufacturing sector as well. How do we make sure other sectors of our economy are viable? We have the solid mineral sector, which has its own complications. Trying to figure out ways, I know NHS is working on that, to try and figure out ways to get the value that is being extracted from solid minerals into the books of Nigeria, because there's also a lot that is lost, again, a lot of security issues as well that are required in that regard. So diversifying into that potentially. Agriculture, taking on more technical, industrialized formats instead of just subsistence farming, so even elevating that a bit more as well. The government has done some work in that regard, but then a lot more has to be done because there's such a chunk that is left in terms of revenue dependency. We have, again, like you said, our budget as well. That reliance, we've seen having to cut things and move forward and move backwards. We saw that during the COVID-19 pandemic, having to reduce our expectations from oil by $20 as well, from 50, and our production, everything else relies on that. So another thing is we can also look to summarily finding other sectors and getting investments as well from other countries, looking at other sectors. Our technology sector actually has a lot of potential.
ICT.
Exactly, ICT, but hasn't had a lot of sort of support in terms of policy development and also getting the youth. Our youth is such a vibrant sort of youth, and there's sort of opportunities that they keep on also rolling back. Finding ways to also energize and encourage them as well will be another pathway towards doing this, while making sure that as we're earning oil and gas revenues right now, we channel it into the right places. So not putting money into potentially refineries, for instance, that may not give us sort of dividends that we expect, not putting it funds into subsidies, and channeling them into places that will benefit us in a longer term.
Okay, as we round up, what's your work relationship? I don't know whether this group still exists. Publish What You Pay. There was a campaign, Publish What You Pay campaign, Make Our Money Work for Us, and all of those civil society initiatives. How much legroom do you think the civil society have in all of this advocacy around winning Nigeria off oil dependency? Are you working alone or working with other civil society organizations?
Yeah, we're working with other civil society organizations, CISLAC, budgets, Publish What You Pay as well. Again, when we had our event recently, we engaged all these different actors because they were also very instrumental in terms of getting the Petroleum Industry Act passed eventually. They're critical to the space. They have the pulse on the Nigerian people as well, and can speak to them and engage them in ways that they understand as well, so they can support this drive and this push. The media as well is a very instrumental part, and I think as we go into 2023 and elections, etc., they'll play a very critical role as well. And the government, making sure that they make the right decisions now, because everyone will be affected moving forward. Nobody is going to be isolated from these issues.
Yeah, I'm worried about something. Why is there, before the Petroleum Industry Act was passed, we were told that this will bring all the withheld foreign direct investment to Nigeria if it is passed. Now it's been passed, but what we see instead of FDI coming in is divestment. They are selling off some of their shares in Nigeria. What is responsible for that? Maybe we are in your economic thinking card.
Another thing that's unfortunately, like I said, we're a bit late in passing the act because now the tide has turned clearly in terms of more focus on decarbonization. Shareholders are calling for greener energy. And so you have IOCs rebranding even. Instead of all companies, they're now Total Energies, for instance, and all different companies becoming more energy focused and reducing their portfolios in terms of fossil fuels, etc. And unfortunately, Nigeria's cost of production still is a bit high, despite the fact that we have passed this act. I would say again, one critical element for this is, even though the act has been passed, implementation is key. Unfortunately, we extended that period of implementation to 18 months as opposed to 6 months. But it's critical that that act is implemented to the letter and the spirit within which it was drafted. we've already started to see some tweaks in terms of changing it. And what that does is makes investors a bit skeptical, because the reason why we passed the act was to ensure that there was clarity in terms of what our laws were, our fiscals were, our governance framework was, everything else. But in tweaking the law, you're now making people think that you may have not have passed the law, because the law is only as good as the paper within which it is written on.
Do you, in 30 seconds, do you have any idea of where we are with the implementation of the UNEP report on oil spill challenge in the Ogoni area? Is there anything going on in terms of remediation efforts?
Remediation efforts, I'm aware there has always been slow. But even beyond that, I would say that the UNEP report was focused on Ogoni. And there are so many different regions. It was meant to be a pilot sort of initiative that would then be rolled out. If we're still focused on Ogoni and not looking at the other areas, when oil becomes less of a going concern, the rest of the Delta would never be remediated, and that would be a huge challenge. But there are things within the Act, I would say, that also account for that. But I will say that it's important to make sure that as all companies divest, the government ensures that they are tied to resolving those legacy issues that they've already sort of been responsible for, so that we don't have a situation where when they've gone, the new owners do not then take on responsibility, and you have sort of the legacy environmental issues being sustained in those areas.
I want to thank you, Judge Ikoli, for coming on the show. It's been a marathon session with you.
It really has.
And you have not failed to deliver. You have become an oil and gas expert. Thanks for coming on my show, and I wish you well in your advocacy, and let's hope that we'll make better success of our opportunity to win Nigeria off oil and gas or fossil fuel. That will be the size of our package today. If you have enjoyed today's edition, please join us next Wednesday when a fresh edition will come your way. This program is up for sponsorship and adverts. Please come do business with us. Have a great day and stay safe.
Don't just wake up your child. Wake up the champion in them.